Right, so as more organizations adopt to a remote workforce, and in this time of unprecedented challenges in terms of working remotely and lockdown, the challenges of leading at a distance become more urgent than ever. So in the seminar, in this meeting today, we'll learn why leading remotely requires us to lead differently, how the 3O model and the remote leadership model work together, to choose the best tool for long distance communication, to practice servant leadership while also taking care of yourselves, and understanding the three main questions around long distance leadership. So getting started, rule number 1. Think about leadership first, location second. Don't let location or distance distract you from the fundamentals of leading people. Leading a team at a distance is first and foremost about leadership, and the principles of leadership haven't changed. They are principles. What has changed is that more people are working in different places, and even perhaps at different times. Given these changes, how we apply the timeless principles of leadership in the workforce and amongst ourselves in this new world matters a great deal. For the team members of working at a distance, it means a great deal for you as their leader, and it means a great deal for the organization. In a remote leadership survey conducted in late 2017, more than 225 managers were examined and questioned through a survey process who at least have parts of their team working remotely. The results show that challenges for remote leaders very closely mirror those for managers in any situation. The survey highlights challenges that arise because of the distance between people and the use of technology to bridge those gaps. 4 common questions arise. How do we know the people are working? Are the people getting enough social interaction? Are we getting good feedback when we need to? And do we consider all the options? And finally, can we be effective as a leader as and when we're co-located? Leaders are making things happen in this new environment because they are working longer and harder. They want to succeed in the virtual world, but they're doing it through effort and guesswork. There is a better way. Let's go to rule number 2. Accept the fact that leading remotely requires you to lead differently. Nearly 80% of white-collar managers and supervisors have at least one direct report who works in a different location. Today, according to the Project Management Institute, 90% of project teams have at least one member, usually more, who aren't co-located with the rest of the team, and if so, at least part of the time they're not. There are 2 major repercussions for leaders as a result of this. First, the methods of communication that enabled us to succeed, if we've been around for a while, have changed. You may have been terrific in face-to-face meetings, but how many of those will you have today? And secondly, the notion of a leader's sense of isolation is no longer simply emotional. You are no longer not only lonely because you have sole responsibility for decisions, or the weight of authority, or feel responsible if people may lose their jobs. You're actually physically alone. But while there may have been significant changes in the way we lead, the act of leadership itself hasn't really changed all that much. The first order of change, meaning we need to do the same things but in a different way. We need to do something faster, smarter, or using different tools. But the task at hand is fundamentally the same. Rule 3. Know that working remotely changes interpersonal dynamics, even if you don't want it to. Whether we're talking about an actual physical presence or the virtual presence, where you are available and visible to your people, being seen is critical to leadership and suffers in a long-distance relationship. Virtual communication changes the interpersonal dynamic, even if you don't want it to. When you speak to someone face to face, you get instantaneous feedback. The broad smile of acceptance or the furrowed brow tells us we need to adjust our message. Repeat it, check for understanding, or get more information before we proceed. We constantly and naturally adjust our messages on the fly based on those real-time responses. In the world where those immediate cues are missing, you must ensure that the message you are giving is easily understood and that you find other ways to receive these critical clues. The basic needs of humans don't change, but in the context of working in different locations, you may need to make more important and obvious changes than they were in the past. If you have team members teleworking from home, they may have interaction needs that were previously met in the workplace that are now missing. As a long-distance leader, you must find ways to meet those needs, because as those needs are met, people are better able to focus on and complete their work successfully. Models that matter. Rule 4. Use technology as a tool, not as a barrier or as an excuse. The remote leadership model depicts 3 interworking gears that work together to propel remote work. The first gear and the largest gear is the leadership and management gear, which is the work that you are hired to do. This is the largest gear and most fundamental part of leading remotely. It is based on the fundamental leadership principles. The leadership and management gear reminds us that our job as leaders, the leadership and management behaviors we are expected to exhibit, are the same as they have ever been. The second, smaller but critical gear is the tools and technology gear. This is what you must use in order to make things happen and work at a distance. The medium-sized gear where leaders may not be comfortable using new technology or tools, which can impact on leadership effectiveness. The tools and technology gear is perhaps the most important difference when leading remotely. Leaders are expected to exhibit all of the traditional leadership behaviors and to do it using tools and technology which they might not be comfortable with. And that's a bigger deal than you might think. You have to ask yourself, what tools do you have at your disposal to help get the job done? Are you using the right tool for the right job? Do you rely too much on those tools that you are comfortable with? Or, contrary to that, do you not rely on the tools that you're uncomfortable with? Finally, the small gear is the skills and impact gear, the ability to use those tools well. The smallest gear represents a simple concept, but can cause the biggest problems. Choosing the appropriate tool is critical to your business and your effectiveness. The skill and impact gear is the simplest concept and the easiest one to maintain, yet often the one that can cause the biggest issue. Choosing the appropriate tool for the job is critical. But if you can't use the tool you've chosen effectively, all the hard work and good intentions in the world won't get the job done. Rule 5. Leading requires a focus on the 3O model. So what is the 3O model? The 3O model of leadership outlines 3 areas of focus all leaders must recognize and use to reach their maximum success. This model is a more complete picture of the biggest gear in the remote leadership model. Outcomes. the first O. You lead your people with the purpose of reaching a desired outcome. For a long-distance leader, this focus on outcomes is even more important and can be definitely harder for several reasons or barriers. Isolation, lack of environmental cues, and potentially less repetition of messages, etc. are examples. Others. You lead with and through other people to reach these outcomes. Long-distance leaders focus on others because you can't do it alone anyway. You win when they win. You build trust and relationships when you focus on others. You are more influential when you focus on others, and team members are more engaged when you focus on them. The third and final O, ourselves. You can't leave yourself out of this model. While leadership is about outcomes and other people, none of that happens without you, whether you like it or not. Who you are and how you lead is important wherever your people work. But when you are leading at a distance, some of this is less transparent, and your beliefs and assumptions are even more crucial. Note that outcomes and others come before ourselves, and this follows the servant leadership principle. Achieving outcomes at a distance. Rule 6. Leading successfully requires achieving goals of many types. As a long-distance leader, you need to be aware of, think about, and help your teams reach all of the different outcomes in your organization. You have organizational outcomes, which must be crystal clear so that you can help your team members individually and collectively move towards successfully achieving them. The questions that need to be asked are, how clear are the targets? How often do you think about them? How often does your team discuss or review these targets to track progress? We then have team outcomes. When your team is in the same location, you can catch side conversations and parking lot banter, and you have many ways to reinforce and clarify the goals. When you have team members working on their own, these clarifications don't happen easily. People must know how what they do fits into the work and the success of the team. And finally, we have personal and individual outcomes. Remember that working remotely can be like living alone on an island. There is less interaction with you and the other team members, less sense of belonging and team, and none of it happens by itself. Without solid and clear targets, individuals can drift, losing sight of both the big picture and their role. That's why tools like electronic dashboards, intranets, and online project management systems are so important. They provide visibility, even when people are miles apart. On a daily working basis, perhaps the more important than goals are expectations. Expectations aren't just about the big goal or the big look. They're about more than just what needs to happen. They're about how the work gets done, the rules for working together, and the way you'll support and help each other. What tools you'll use and what good communication looks like. When the expectations are clear and when understood, the chances people will be successful are higher. Furthermore, there is a better chance of the outcomes described above being reached. Rule 7. Focus on achieving goals, not just setting them. Most everyone agrees that goals should be SMART. That is, specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, results-oriented, and time-driven. People find 2 of these criteria the hardest to master and the most difficult to make work from a distance are making goals measurable and determining what realistic looks like. To make the work of others more measurable, ask how else you can quantify the effort and the contributions of others. These questions might help. What are the quantity components of the work? How does time factor into the success of the work? How is the quality of the work determined? When working with team members who are remote, setting measures in smaller chunks can be even more important. When people work alone in their own bubble and the targets are too big, it is easy to let too much time pass before realizing the need to course correct. A realistic goal is one that stretches your belief, yet you can create a workable, real-world plan that might allow you to reach that goal. To make the goals of your remote team members more realistic, provide the needed information. Expect engagement. Get their thoughts first. Modify their thoughts with your thoughts, if needed, and gain agreement. Make all metrics, KPIs, and dashboards shared and visible to the entire team. Rule 8. Coach and mentor your team effectively regardless of where they work. Coaching is an area that long-distance leaders routinely feel they could improve. Time seems scarce, conversations can be uncomfortable, or seem even more difficult at a distance. And often, leaders don't feel confident that they're doing it well. There are two big reasons for coaching remotely feels more complicated and stressful. Firstly, every interaction needs to be conscious and intentional. And secondly, communicating through technology creates mental and social obstacles that don't exist in face-to-face conversation. What follows is designed to address these two issues that are particularly troubling when you're at a distance. Make sure that it is truly a real conversation. Too many coaching leaders do too much of the talking too much of the time. If you want to be a better coach or mentee to your mentee, you must create a real two-way conversation with the other person about their behaviors and the results. The best way to do this is to ask them first and create a conversation with them speaking first. Have a process of asking great questions and make coaching consistent and frequent. Use your webcam. We rely on visual and non-verbal cues to help us communicate. Our brains crave visual connection to the people we speak with. Webcams help mitigate the fact that you're not in the same room. And finally, follow up. Always. When people aren't seen, you can't rely on spontaneity. You must be focused and intentional about all of your follow-up. Rule 9. There's a little bit of an introduction in engaging with others. Engaging others in one place where working remotely really becomes complicated and radically different than the ways we worked before. Leading remotely requires influence more than command. There are levels of accountability, trust, and proactive communication that, while desirable in the traditional workspace, are absolutely critical when you're not in close physical proximity. How we engage others in a digitally connected but physically isolated world will largely determine whether you hit your goals and how stressful it will be along the way. One of the most quoted adages of all times is known as the Golden Rule. Do unto others as you'd like them to do unto you. When everyone works in the same location, it's much easier to pick up the signals that tell us how to work with other people. You'll learn who's a morning person. You'll learn who isn't. You can tell who's the extroverted, chatty people are, and who are the people just sitting at their desk with their headphones on or plowing through their daily work. When working and leading at a distance, some of the cues are missing. So you might tend to work from your own assumptions, your personal preferences, or your more limited history with the other person. So let's modify the golden rule into the golden suggestion. Lead others in the way that works best for them. Assessments like the DISC assessments we offer can help you and your team identify the areas where you mesh and work well together, as well as where there may be sources of challenges in the behavioral styles. Consider people's preferences and ask people how they want to work with you. Make sure that when you're seeking this information, you phrase it as a neutral question about their preference. For example, how can I help you be successful? I want to support you and help you stay on track. How often would you like us to have a one-to-one interaction? Rule 10. Leading successfully requires an understanding of what people are thinking, not just what they are doing. Politics, although usually applied in a government entity, is simply the dynamics of trying to reach decisions and move an organization towards a goal. Being separated from those with whom we work or lead can present political challenges. In particular, leaders need to be seen and see. See means gathering information needed to understand what's going on within the organization as a whole and within your team. Be seen refers to how others get their information about and from you as leader. First, you need to be aware of how you gather information. If all your information is coming from the same three sources, or you're trying to understand how people work together strictly from email threads, you are giving yourself limited data on which to base decisions. Consider gathering information more widely and in a variety of ways. Then process that data into a clear, accurate picture of what's going on around you. Ask more people, scan more sources, and be more alert on the conference calls and virtual meetings to get a clearer picture of reality. As a leader, be more aware of the impressions you make. If people know you mostly as a signature on an email and not a real person, you are constraining their ability to get a positive, accurate impression of you and what you're trying to accomplish and why. As a leader, are you being seen often enough? How are you visible to your team? And are they seeing you? And how do they know? And how do you know that they are seeing? Rule 11. Building trust at a distance doesn't happen by accident. When working remotely, it's foolish to say that trust is more important than when you're all working together at the same location. What's different when working remotely is that trust is harder to build and more easily broken. The Leadership Institute has identified 3 components necessary for high levels of trust to exist. Common purpose. Do you and the people you lead have the same common purpose? Competence. Do you believe that the people you lead are competent? And motives. Are the people willing to go the extra mile? The more alignment of these 3 components, the more trust will exist. A long-distance leader does some very practical things to help build trust as a team and between team members. Examples of building trust with a remote team include using meetings strategically, building time for people to really see how smart the team is. You could try showcasing one person per meeting, letting them talk about their work or highlighting their strengths for them. Share praise in public and delegate in public. When assigning tasks, the perception of fairness is as important as equality itself. Using technology to build relationships. Synchronous tools like webcams allow people to put faces to the names. Research shows that when we know the other person's face, there's a decrease in negative behaviors like lying, exclusion, and being over-aggressive. Encourage the use of webcams, especially in one-to-one scenarios. You can always use asynchronous tools like SharePoint to showcase task status and expertise. Synchronous simply means that all events are occurring in a certain time order that can be predicted. A certain event will always follow another, and they can't be interchanged. Asynchronous is obviously the opposite of synchronous. Rule 12. Identify the leadership results you need. Then select the communication tool to achieve them. Long distance or virtual leadership is mostly the same as traditional leadership, except for the pesky technology. That's an awfully small hinge swinging a terribly big door. There's a simple tool to help people focus their thinking about which communication tool and method to use, when, and how. In 2001, the Swiss-German researcher Bettina Duchel created a simple matrix that helped explain this concept. For communication to be effective and appropriate, you want to strike the right balance between richness and scope. We all know humans communicate in multiple ways. Our tone of voice, the expression on our faces, our body language, and the choice of words we all use help us interpret a seemingly simple message. The best example of rich communication is a one-on-one meeting over coffee. You and the other person are in physical proximity. You can see and hear each other. You are getting all the non-verbal, visual, and social cues you need to interpret the other person's message. Yet, it's impractical often, especially in times like these, to meet face-to-face every time we need to communicate with somebody. So every time we pick up the phone or fire off an email, rather than get in the car or hold a video conference, we're sacrificing richness in favor of scope. Email is the perfect example of a tool with great scope. Hundreds of people can receive the same message at the same time, in theory at least. You can't, however, see the reactions of your reader, hear their wails of anguish or shouts of joy, or answer their questions in real time. You don't know if you've been understood correctly, or if people have bought into the concept. As a leader, be mindful of your messages and communication goals. Then choose the right tool for the task. Web meetings are a good example. Let's say, for example, you have Skype for Business, now Microsoft Teams, as your daily collaboration tool. Web meetings are in the middle ground, fairly rich with good scope. In fact, depending on how they are used, they can be quite high in richness. Example, one-on-one video calls, coaching, and training. Or have terrific scope, the dreaded but often useful all-hands meeting. But generally, you are sacrificing one factor for the other, based on how you use the tool. If you need to brainstorm effectively, you might want to have small groups using webcams and full participation with the online whiteboard, for example, Zoom meetings. You may even want to record the meeting for later use or to include those that couldn't attend. That leads to surprisingly rich communication. On the other hand, if you're not using webcams and you had 100 or so people online, for example, GoToWebinar, you might find your message and might be able to get your message out in very high scope, but you will have little real chance to engage people, get input, answer questions in real time, or gauge your participants' reactions. This doesn't make that application wrong. The point is to be mindful of what you're trying to get across, to whom and how richly it needs to be done. Rule 13. Maximize the tool's capabilities or you'll minimize your effectiveness. When you realize that you must build trust, communicate clearly, and have productive meetings, you need to use the technology at your disposal. That requires choosing the right tool for the job, by balancing richness and scope, and then using the chosen tool as effectively as possible. Asynchronous communication allows you to get the information when you need it. In a distributed workplace, a central repository of on-demand information is needed. Asynchronous tools include the following: video and recorded messages. Video allows you to add a visual component to your communication. Rather than just broadcast a voicemail, It is almost as easy to push record and use video. Common file locations. Tools like SharePoint, Google Docs, Basecamp, and other products allow permanent, easily accessible, and searchable central warehouse of data information. Email is best used when you need to create greater scope. You need a permanent record and the message is complete. Synchronous communication happens live, at the same time for everybody involved. Webcams and video chat. These are the ultimate remote one-on-one CNBC tool. Many people think that a webcam is used best to broadcast messages, and it's simply useful for that. But it is probably more useful in one-on-one situations. Text messaging. Texting is useful because it utilizes the device your people are most likely to have on them at any time of day or night, their mobile phones. Texting can work for business. It's how good a portion of your team functions every day of their lives. Texting is best used when messages are time sensitive. Telephone and conference calls. Although the phone is the tool you grew up with, for most of us, and many of them, in the business world, it isn't always the most effective way to communicate with teams. Sometimes people can't hear you well, or are taking the call where they can't speak openly, or are multitasking. Teleconferences are notoriously bad for getting equal input from people, or any input at all. It seems someone's always over-contributing, and it's not always the people you want to hear from. Conversely, it's easy for people to hide or not participate at all. This challenge can be overcome only if you actively seek their engagement. Understanding ourselves. If you're a believer in the servant leadership, you put yourself last, or at least behind other stakeholders. Taken to the extreme, focusing on others can lead to sublimating yourself and to not taking care of your mental, physical, and social being. You can't really focus on the desired outcomes or engage with your team without looking at the one constant, yourself. A leader who is physically exhausted, mentally drained, and socially isolated is not going to be effective. We need to be honest about how we are doing and take care of ourselves. Rule 14. Seek feedback to best serve outcomes, others, and ourselves. When you walk the plant floor or stand in the middle of the cubicle where people are working, you can sense the mood of the team. When you sit in your home office, miles from the nearest employee, you're drawing conclusions based on how you feel about the situation, what you've seen in a few email threads, or what you've heard in one quick conversation with a team member. Soliciting feedback can help you communicate and lead far more effectively. When soliciting feedback on yourself, especially as leader, keep some things in mind. Start with the existing evidence. Before going to individuals, go back through relevant files, email threads, and meeting notes. How are the people feeling? What are they thinking about? How are you doing? And how do they think and what do they feel about the decisions you're making? Identify people you trust. Don't confuse this with people you like or who always say yes to your ideas. Yet trusted advisors can come from many sources. Ask open-ended questions. Make them truly open and not presumptive. For example, ask, based on what you've heard, what about this would work? What would be the problem? How do you think people will respond and why? Have these conversations as richly as possible. If you really want feedback and input, take the time and use the tools in ways discussed earlier. Schedule the conversation, block sufficient time for them, and use the tools at your disposal. Have conversations over time. If what you're considering is really important, people may do their best thinking before and after the conversation. If you want good insight, people should be able to prepare for the conversation. Rule 15. Examine your beliefs and self-talk. So beliefs determine how you lead. Good leaders require a relatively healthy image. After all, if you don't think you're correct a good percentage of the time, or somewhat capable, or the right man or woman for the job, you're likely you wouldn't find yourself in this position. Unless you're a complete sociopath, however, the voices in your head aren't always going to be supportive or positive. Here are some warning signs that your internal dialogue is going in an unhealthy direction, as well as how to steer it in a more positive path. You hear the voice telling you, you're an idiot. That's the worst idea ever. Really? Ever? At times like this, it's okay to revert to school days and ask yourself, says who? If you take that question seriously and it takes you back to the neutral facts, what evidence is there to support or deny your idea or premise? First of all, it's highly unlikely you're an idiot. And it's even more certain that it's not the worst idea ever. I can do this, your little voice says. When you get frustrated to the point of saying you can't do something, change the word. I haven't yet figured it out. Or I haven't yet figured out how to. Or up until now, I haven't been able to do it. Or different ideas entirely. Changing the word recognizes there are difficulties, but still accepts the possibility of success. With changes, your internal motivation. I'm a fraud and I'll be exposed, your little voice keeps telling you. This feeling, known as imposter syndrome, is estimated to affect 70% of all leaders. Here are some techniques to help you address the self-talk monster. Check your assumption. Recognize your icons for what they are. When in doubt, ask, says who. Accept positive feedback as valid. When people tell you how smart or capable you are, believe them and don't dismiss or downplay it. And get help from others. Remember that even the best and brightest go to others for help, feedback, and answers. Rule 16. Accept that you can't do it all. You shouldn't try anyway. One of the greatest challenges you face is finding the balance between being responsible to your organization and its people and taking care of yourself so that you can be both highly effective in your leadership role and fully functional as a human being, spouse, partner, neighbor, or productive member of society. Put your ego aside for a moment and ask this simple question. If I got hit by a bus tomorrow, how would my team function? There is a lot of power in that question because it forces you to look at things that could encroach on your boundaries. Do your people know what they are doing and what they should be doing? Are you the only source for answers? Do you have the right people in the right roles? Do you guard your time? Are you answering email and phone calls when on holiday? Look at your organization's processes and workflow. Where are you being drawn in unnecessarily? Are there times when you are not critical to the process? If there aren't, could there be times that you aren't critical to the process? Who else in your organization could take on some of those responsibilities? Identify areas where your team could handle your activities and often more effectively. And when you delegate successfully, you set your team up to succeed and you give yourself the freedom to set healthy personal boundaries. Rule 17. Balance your priorities in a remarkable long-distance leader. Outcomes and others do come before ourselves. That doesn't mean we surrender our humanity, our health, or our sanity. There is a difference between self-preservation and selfishness. Let's start with values. Your values determine how you decide what is truly important to you. So, what is important to you? When you ask questions about what is important to you, and you answer honestly, you will begin to see that the barriers to managing your time are mostly of your own construction. Everyone has the same amount of time. The question is, how will you use it? Time management is really choice management. If you aren't clear on your values, you can't make clear choices on how you're going to use your time. Knowing your values allows you to prioritize your activities. For example, if you need spiritual balance, working on finance reports on a Sunday might be a bad call. If you need physical exercise to be happy and productive, get to the gym when they're open again, or now just walk around the garden. That time to yourself won't undo all your good work for the rest of the week or the day. If you haven't yet, make a list of things that are important to you and ask yourself, am I satisfied with the time I'm giving them? If the answer is no, try to identify small blocks of time you can dedicate to them. Rule 18. Ensure your leadership development prepares long-distance leaders. Whether you're an individual manager trying to grow the leadership capabilities of your team, or you're in charge of learning development for a corporation, here are some strategies and approaches to create the plan for growing great leaders in the dispersed workplace. When considering leadership development, there are 3 pairs of questions that should be considered. Firstly, what kind of organization do you want to be? And does your current culture match this vision? Every company has a culture, which is defined as the way we do things here. It doesn't take too much insight to realize that when people work apart from each other, the way things are generally done can vary greatly. Without guidance, people working remotely and left to their own devices tend to get very task-orientated and independent. If that is what you're looking for from your people, you might well just be fine with that. If, however, you have a team of individual customer service reps or salespeople focused on their targets, for example, if you want people to collaborate and build strong relationships, it can be done virtually, but it needs to be done intentionally, whether at an individual, team, or organizational level. Secondly, what behaviors do you expect from your long-distance leaders? And what gaps must you address? Using your existing competencies as a starting point, then use all 3 gears in the remote leadership model to frame the discussion about additions, changes driven by leading remotely. For example, does your existing competency model accurately reflect the expectations of your remote leaders? Which tools do you want them to use, and when should they be used? This is the richness versus scope discussion. Do your leaders use the tools in an impactful way? And thirdly, what is your plan for developing and supporting your long-distance leaders? How will the organization support remote members? The focus of developing and supporting should be learning and not simply training. When you change your perspective to learning, you will do 3 things. Connect learning to the work, make learning available in different ways, and make it a process. Rule 19. When all else fails, remember rule number 1. Think about leadership first, location second. Remember, the active leadership itself hasn't really changed all that much. We need to do the same things, but in a different way. While there are adjustments we need to make to lead in a world where more distance between the team members, there is far more that we won't change. We are the leaders we need to lead in our businesses, in our organizations, and in our community. With that in mind, let's now get to work leading more effectively. So to wrap up, I thank you for your time. I'd like you to list 5 ideas that you need to take action on today. Are you ready to develop your 90-day leadership plan? Get with your action coach and schedule your 90-day planning workshop. And finally, I'm offering a complimentary 2-hour leadership strategy session. What are the current constraints in your business today? What adjustments, shifts, and pivots need to be made now to meet the evolving marketplace? What is your 3-year objective for your business? What it means to you personally to achieve your 3-year objective? And what are the obstacles that are likely to be encountered in the way to achieving your 3-year objective?